Well, welcome to the ongoing saga of a wayward Marine. And I have had also combat experience besides going to a lot of technical schools. So today I'd like to delve into that part, and I'll leave the next part for somebody else. Well, before I get started, I'd like to mention one story that our previous speaker forgot to mention. That was about two rather elderly ladies that were members of a bridge club, and they used to meet every once a week at the bridge club, and one of them was 94 years old and one was 92, and they were playing opposite each other one day as opponents. And the younger one, who was only 92, she turned her head and she looked and she said to the older lady, she says, "I'm not sure, but I think there's a suppository in your ear." And she said, "Oh no, that couldn't possibly be." So the younger one said to her, "Well, take it out and look at it." So the older gal reached in her ear and she pulled it out and she looked at it. She said, "My God, that is a suppository. Now I think I know where my hearing aid is." Well, after all of that technical schooling that they put us through, and it must have cost somebody an awful lot of money, they decided that we had to be put to work using all that knowledge. So I was assigned to Cherry Point, North Carolina, as an instructor for night fighter radar gear, and doing all our instruction in the air. I might have mentioned that. And I finally shipped out with Night Fighter Squadron 542. We were at that time flying 6F6s 3N. And the version 3N was a night fighter. And probably the main difference between them, the 3N and the 5N, which we transitioned to down in the islands, was that the old 3N had what we call the AIA equipment, Aircraft Interceptor Airborne it was called, and that gear was modified and improved and became the APS-12, and that's what they put in the 5N, so that's what we flew. The 3N only had 650s for armament. The 5N had 450s, and the two inboard guns were 20 millimeter cannons. Well, our first operation, of course, was to get organized, and we had a lot of young pilots. We didn't have too many veterans. Our CO at that time was a major named Kellum, who had been an old Navy test pilot, had never been in combat, and really wasn't good at it when he did get out there. He wouldn't fly in any of the areas where we definitely had bogeys coming in every night. So he eventually was replaced by an older pilot that actually had been down at Guadalcanal and spent a lot of time on Samoa, and transitioned into night fighters from day fighters. He at first was a F6F pilot and had 3 kills as a F6F pilot, and then he got 3.5 more with the F6 as a night fighter. Well, our first mission was to get out of California and head for wherever the action was. We didn't know anything about it at the time. They wouldn't tell us anything. They just said, "You're going overseas." And so naturally I assumed at that time that we were going up to Kiska, so I took an overcoat along with me. Now you can imagine what I would do with that down in the Caroline Islands. So we got down there and we just continued our training, familiarization, orientation hops, etc., until the invasion of Peleliu in the Palau group. And we were some 400 miles east of them at Ulithi. in the Caroline Islands. And we used to run nuisance raids over to Yap, and we didn't have to do anything at Peleliu because 541 was over there and had the situation well in hand. And so we flew mostly nightcap for the fleet in Ulithi, which became a very well-known staging harbor, and at times we had as many as 1,400 ships in there, including the various men of war. So, well, that was kind of team duty. We had a couple incidents there where kamikaze came in and flew up the fantail of the Randolph, the carrier Randolph, and we actually had a couple of those two-man submarines come in through the net, and fortunately we had a torpedo bomber squadron there of what do you call it, TBFs, and they actually got both of the subs dive bombing. Later on, when they started the battles over in Leyte, why we started preparing to move north, and I thought sure we were going to Leyte, but we bypassed the Leyte operation in the big battle of Leyte Gulf and went directly to the Marianas, where we set up some workshop on Tinian and Saipan. And again, we became part of another big staging area. And when we left Saipan, why, we headed for what I thought was Iwo Jima, and I thought, well, gee, we're going in there and do the cleanup. That's nice. I like to get in there after the first initial landings all the time anyhow. So we headed for Iwo Jima, and we get 3 days out to sea. This time we're on a Navy, AKA an attack transport. And the chaplain gets on the PA system and tells us all that the ship is now underway for Okinawa, and I hadn't heard of it yet. So I quick ran down wherever you go, and there was some rat hole in that boat where they kept us all, and with our bunks 5 tiers high, you know. And I had a map down there that I don't know why I kept it, but I didn't know where we were going anyhow. So I looked at it and I saw Okinawa on that map, and it was way up there in the Ryukyu Islands near Japan. And it still had a great big Japanese flag on it, and I said, turn the boat around. I don't want to go there. And then, but you know, you don't get your choice in the Marine Corps. There's always somebody up there with something shiny on his shoulder, and he says, well, here's what you're going to do next. So we did it. And well, after we were coming into the southern end of Okinawa on the day before April Fool's Day. And we made our landing on April 1st, and amidst a lot of noise. I didn't like that. And started making our way. We were set to go right up to Yantan airstrip, and I said, what for? Our airplanes aren't even here yet. So, because they were coming in on a carrier, I forget the name of it, but I forget. I'm getting as old as some of these guys over here.
No way.
Well, anyhow, they put us over the side about 4 o'clock in the morning after feeding everybody real well with what they called, you know, the dead man's meal, steak and eggs. And they lasted just long enough to get all over the deck of the Higgins boats that we were in. I never saw so many sick people in my life, anyhow. So we headed for the beach. We were in the second wave, and that's a complete other story. We had very little opposition coming in, and but the next wave really got it. So we made our way up, at least on shore, and I found I wasn't the only one, but I found a native tomb where they had put made their tombs in the big caves down close to the seawall, and so I crawled in there with several other people and waited for the go-ahead to go up on the strip. And it took us 2 days, but we got up to Yantan and set up our headquarters there, waiting for our planes to come in. And they did the next day. And from then on, it got a lot more active. We got, I don't know how many nights in a row we got bombed. And I learned to live in a hole in the ground, which many Marines did. And I thought, now, this is kind of crazy to volunteer for something like this. Don't ever do it again. And that was the primary lesson I learned. So, well, we would get hit every night for, I don't know, about 60 or 70 straight nights up there, it seemed like. In fact, somebody put up a great big sign on the only road that came up to the Yantan Strip from the beach, and it said, "Welcome to Yantan, where every night is like the 4th of July." And that wasn't an exaggeration. So, well, I don't know how many of you airplane drivers over here were on the ground when the bombs were dropping, but it's quite an experience. You never really know what to expect. You can hear them coming, and they make a funny sound, a whirling sound, something like that, before you hear the big boom. But if they throw out a sake bottle, it makes the same kind of noise, and you wait for the big boom, and it never happens. So well, anyhow, after we settled in there, our planes came in, and we had a few rather exciting evenings. I don't know if you've heard of the great raid that was the Goretsu Raiders. These are Japanese airborne saboteurs, and they came in and flying something similar to the C-47, but it's called the Dyna. And they crash landed on the Yantan Strip and then proceeded to blow up the fighters that we had in the hard stands along the strip, and they got into the 100-octane fuel dump and started that on fire, and that thing burned all night. And the next day, we got most of them on the ground, but my squadron we were flying that night, and we had 14 mechs down in a revetment between the two strips in front of the tower. The strips were in the form of an A, an east-west strip and northeast-southwest strip. And across the A was the ready area, and we had 14 mechs down there. Only one guy had a rifle with him, and they got pretty cocky about this time of the war because it was late. And anyhow, we had to go down there and rescue them. And I didn't volunteer, but two guys did, and they carried them down a 45 submachine gun, an M1, and a 45 pistol. And as they got down there, in the meantime, some of the aircraft, anti-aircraft gun crew had brought a couple of M1s over to the mechs in the revetment, and they start shooting at us guys that were trying to bring down some more armament for them. Well, the Japs had quite a night that night. They blew up a few F4Us, just like this one, from the old checkerboard squadron. I don't know if you know what that one was. And they got just one of ours. But they would run along the side. They were throwing hand grenades in the cockpit, and then they had a small mine with a suction cup on it that they would just slap on the cowl. And then, besides that, they got into one of the hospital ships that was taking the wounded back to Saipan. They were loaded to take off at daybreak, and one of them got in there and blew that up. And then we had the old single-tailed B-24 that the Navy called the original B-36 Navy land-based bombers. And one guy got inside of one of those, And we saw him moving all around with a flashlight. Nobody wanted to get too close to the airplane because they knew he was going to blow it up, and eventually he did, right under the tower. Oh, that was another thing. When they came in the Dyna and crash landed on the strip, why, whoever was working up in the tower took the green light and he shined it down on the Dyna when they were coming out, and of course made himself a perfect target. And then of course he took a slug right through his chest. And but another incident when they were coming in, the fleet had pretty well smoked out our strip. So and the wind was in the right direction, so it would come up off the fleet, up the hill, and right across Yantan. Well, one of these planes coming in had seen the road that went along the east side of the east-west strip, and it was smoked out, but they thought that was they were over the water. And so they started jumping out, and there were 8 of them in a row laying in the road because they had jumped out. So they had been hit by an aircraft, by the way, and the thing went down. But anyhow, a couple of them crash landed on the strip, and we had quite an incidental evening. In the morning, why we went down on the strip to see what was left, and under the one Dyna that came up almost to the tower was laying down on one wheel had been knocked off, and it was laying down on the wing, and underneath that wing was one of the Goretsu Raiders yet, and he just rolled over and he threw a grenade out in front of 3 of our guys, and didn't kill anybody, but one guy got shrapnel through the back of both of his ears, another one got hit in the heel, and another one took a slug across his nose and he lost both eyes. But anyhow, after that we were a little more cautious about digging around to see if there are any more left, and we were able to get them all. So, well, besides that, we moved from there. We shot down something like 15, I think, over Yantan and around Yantan. Well, mostly up around the island of Aishima, if you remember, that's where Ernie Pyle got killed, and then later on, General Buckner got a sniper shot, General Buckner, and a Marine General, Lieutenant General Geiger had to take over as the senior commander on Okinawa. This was all after the big argument between General MacArthur and Admiral Nimitz as to who was going to run the operation in the North Pacific, or from the Central Pacific on up. And of course, Nimitz was about 40, 50 pounds heavier than MacArthur, so he won. Well, then when it became necessary to assume that we were going to secure Okinawa, why they decided that we should move up to a northern strip, and we did. We moved up to the little town of Kin, or Shimu, and which was only a fighter strip. Yantan was a long enough bomber strip, and so we moved up there, and during that operation I think we got 3 more. We had 19 and a half kills anyhow, which wasn't bad for a night fighter squadron. While there, they decided that maybe as long as we're near the end of the road, we'd be good candidates to be the first occupational troops in Japan. So they told us to pack up and get ready, and not to become occupational troops, but to make the landing. We were going to be part of that task force that went into Japan, probably as the Suicide Marines, I guess. But fortunately, it didn't get to that, because while we were up on the Shimu Strip, we heard one day that the United States had somehow managed to invent and drop what they called an atomic bomb. I had no idea what it was, and never did figure it out till I took a course in atomic physics in college. Well, after they dropped that bomb, we thought, gee, that sounds pretty good. We were half packed up anyhow. We'll go right up there. And that's what happened. 3 days later, they dropped the second one on Nagasaki, and we were told to get ready to board ship, that we were going to be the first occupational troops in Japan, and we were. They sent us up there on, again, I think the USS Sherburne, another Navy attack troop carrier, and we went into Yokohama Harbor, and eventually we had gone all the way up to Yokohama, and then they decided, well, we weren't going to embark there, or disembark, so we went back down the bay to the naval base of Yokosuka, or Yokosuka, but it's Yokosuka, and we took over the big Navy base down there, and we were stationed in Japanese barracks, and we stayed there for, I don't know, 3-4 months. That was over one Christmas, I remember that. Well, anyhow, that was the end of our work in the Pacific. We did orientation there, quite a bit of orientation flying, that was all, and our pilots were relieved. Their tour of duty was up, but all the enlisted men had to stay there. And we eventually started eliminating people on what they call the number system, point system. And here most of us were sitting up there with anywhere from 70 to 90 points, and they kept freezing us until they were getting out on 38 points, and we were still there. So, well, eventually they got to our numbers anyhow, and I was able to get back home. And we hit probably one of the worst hurricanes in the Pacific on the way back. We didn't even make 100 miles a day. And I think it took us about 3 weeks to get home from Japan. And we finally got into someplace on the California coast, Port Hueneme, I think. And everybody was so glad to get home. It was 2 days before we got home. You could see a whole string of sleeping bags behind our ship. Nobody was going to carry anything extra on shore again. So, and I had picked up a Japanese 31 caliber Air Sakas rifle for a souvenir, and but I made sure that I brought that home with me. Anyhow, all in all, while we were out there, our squadron received both presidential and naval unit citations. We had 2 aces, and one of them made one of the most famous comments I ever heard. We were at our squadron reunion in fact, it was in St. Paul in 1983, and the CO of our outfit, he was a 6-kill ace, and he got up to say something one evening at our banquet dinner, and he said, you know, he said, I keep hearing all these stories about what some of our people did and where we were overseas, he says, and a lot of things I don't really remember. He says, do you think I really wasn't paying attention? So you have to take everything that's said with a grain of salt, and know that some people become professional liars, but not Marines. Well, after coming home from Japan, it was a great experience, and I'm sure you all say the same thing. You had $1 million worth of experience, but you wouldn't give a dime for any more of it. So I wanted to tell you one story about Leo Namalini, the great football player, was in my squadron. And great big husky guy, you know, you really had to admire him because he always kept in immaculate physical condition. And but he was kind of a gullible cat. And his job, believe it or not, he knew how to type, so he was put in the squadron office, and we called him the the chairborne paragraph trooper. But I used to tease him mercilessly to the point where I called him the big black terrible wop, and he called me the miserable termite. And he just about did away with me one day. This was when we were aboard ship coming back home. And Leo, of all things, played the harmonica. And you'd swear to God it was a cat fight every time he took it out of his pocket. So a couple of us decided that we're going to steal his harmonica. So, well, I took it, and immediately I gave it to another kid by the name of John Heppert. And we'd wait until we got in the chow line, and one of us would get in front of Leo and one behind him, several guys in between, and then whoever had the harmonica would blow a big note on it, whatever it was, and then pass it down the other side of the line. Leo would hear that sound, and he'd come running right back to where he heard it. By that time, the other guy was blowing it up in front of him. So anyhow, finally, after about 3 times, he caught me with it. And that was a sad day, because it was, I came as close to being a casualty of war as anybody ever was. Leo grabbed me, and I had just passed the harmonica, and he said, "You had that, you little termite." And he picked me up, and he says, "Tell me where that harmonica is, or I'm going to throw you over the side." And he actually picked me up and held me out over the side of the ship. And my eyes were about this big, and I had a hold of his arm. If he would have dropped me, I would have taken an arm with me. So anyhow, I lied to him, and I said, "I haven't got it, the Russian has." And the Russian was littler than I was. So Leo, he says, "Are you sure he's got it?" And I said, "Yeah." And just then this kid Heppert blew it again, and he dropped me down on the deck, and what a relief that was. You know, I never was really good at swimming in salt water. And besides, then he went and got the Russian. He did the same thing. And he held him out over the ship, and the Russian knew nothing about it. He was just laughing at Leo running back and forth along the chow line, you know, till he caught somebody that he could dominate. Well, I had many stories like that about Leo, and one other one was that he used to get seasick, real seasick. And so I would usually wait for him to go down to the mess hall at chow time and try to stand right across from him. We never had any seats to sit on in the mess hall. You had to stand up so he'd get done in a hurry and get out of there. And one time, I was right across from Leo, and he was already green. And we had something like green pork chop gravy and pork chop, you know. And most dogs wouldn't eat it, but they gave it to us. And so I got right across from Leo, and if you know aboard ship, you've always got some kind of ice cream in a little package. Well, I put the ice cream right on top of this greasy pork chop and then cut off a big chunk and started. And Leo started heaving. And so he says, "I got to get out of here." And I ran over ahead of him and dunked the tray, you know, and was going up the ladder to the deck. And Leo was right behind me and kept saying, "Keep going, you little bastard, I'm going to kill you," he said. And so I was about 3/4 of the way up the steps, and Leo got so sick to his stomach he couldn't hold it. And he threw up all over my back. All we were wearing was loose dungarees. I didn't even have my boondockers laced up, and my back was full, my shoes were full. And he started laughing till it come out his nose. He almost broke it. And then I got up to the deck, and Leo was right behind me then, and he ran over to the rail and finished up. And I just stood there and took all my clothes off and threw them over the side. So, well, that was really the end of my combat career. Leo took, he took all the fight out of me. Well, subsequently, when I came back and went to college and then got into industry, I stayed in the technical field with Minneapolis Honeywell, working on autopilots and gas gauges, and then I went to UNIVAC and got in the computer business, and in fact, I ran the big UNIVAC installation at the White Sands Missile Range for 6 years. I maintained that system down. But that's a whole nother story, and if you want to continue the saga, I'll go through my industrial experience and bring you up to date. And we might even get into some medical history, because I am a perfect example of modern technology, having had 2 triple bypasses, radical prostatectomy, a hernia, blood clot that almost lost my left leg, and I have a pacemaker that keeps me alive. Well, anyhow, thanks a lot. I'll answer any questions. Anything you would like to know about our squadron record or whatever. By the way, I have a book over there written by my old CO, Bruce Porter, who was an ace, and anyone that would like to read it, you can borrow it. So,
very good.
Thanks a lot.
Well, come on, Al, you're on television.
You take care.
Thank you, Tut. Now, gentlemen, I hope that inspires some of you guys to talk to Dick Kaminsky and get on the program here. We need this kind of stuff to keep this organization going.